There is a menu. It was printed on April 14th, 1912, on thick, cream-colored paper with gold lettering across the top. 11 courses, oysters, consomme, salmon, filet mignon, roast duckling, chocolate eclairs. Someone ate this meal that night. They unfolded their napkin, looked at the menu, and chose what they wanted. They never finished their dessert. This is the story of April 14th, 1912, the last normal day on the Titanic. And by the time this video is over, you will understand why normal days are the most important days of all. Let us start at the beginning. The Titanic left Southampton, England on April 10th, 1912. It was supposed to be the greatest voyage in history. The ship was 269 meters long. It weighed 46,000 tons. It had a swimming pool, a Turkish bath, a squash court, a gym, and 4 elevators. 4 elevators on a ship. In 1912, there were 2,224 people on board, passengers and crew. And on April 14th, everything was going perfectly. The morning of April 14th started like any other morning at sea. The ocean was calm, the sky was clear, the temperature was dropping. It was cold, unusually cold for April, but the sun was out and the ship was moving at full speed. 22.5 knots, close to its maximum. The crew was proud of this. The ship was ahead of schedule. Captain Edward John Smith, who was on his final voyage before retirement, was satisfied. He had been sailing for 43 years. He had never lost a ship. He walked the bridge that morning, and everything was exactly as it should be. Now let me tell you about the people, because that is what this channel is about. Not disasters, not statistics, people. On April 14th, 1912, there were 3 very different worlds existing on the same ship, and they had almost nothing to do with each other. In first class, the richest people in the world were living like royalty. John Jacob Astor IV was on board. He was one of the wealthiest men in America, worth the equivalent of $2 billion today. He was traveling with his new wife, Madeline, who was 19 years old and 5 months pregnant. That morning, Astor was reading in his private suite. He had ordered breakfast in his room: eggs Benedict, toast, black coffee. He was calm. He was happy. He was heading home to New York, where his wife would have their baby in a hospital. Surrounded by doctors, he was making plans. Also in first class was Isidor Strauss. He was 67 years old. He and his wife, Ida, had been married for 41 years. Isidor owned Macy's department store. He was one of the most respected businessmen in America. That morning, he and Ida took a walk on the promenade deck together, arm in arm, the way they did every morning. The ocean stretched out in every direction, flat, quiet, silver in the early light. Ida said it was the most peaceful thing she had ever seen. She wrote that in a letter to her son. That letter arrived after she was already gone. And then there was Thomas Andrews. He was the man who built the Titanic. He was 39 years old. He was the head ship designer at Harland and Wolff Shipyard in Belfast, and the Titanic was his masterpiece, his life's work, his greatest achievement. He was on the voyage to observe the ship in action, to take notes, to make a list of small improvements for future ships. That morning, he was walking through the ship with a notebook, checking things. A screw that needed tightening here. A cabin layout that could be better there. He loved this ship the way a father loves a child. He knew every inch of it. Now let us go down, below the first-class dining rooms, below the second-class promenade, all the way down to the lower decks. This is where the third-class passengers lived, and their story on April 14th is the one almost nobody tells. There were over 700 people in third class, mostly immigrants, from Ireland, from Sweden, from Finland, from Lebanon, from Eastern Europe. They were going to America to start over. Many of them had spent everything they had on the ticket. A third-class ticket on the Titanic cost about $32. That was roughly 2 months of wages for a laborer at the time. They had packed everything they owned into one bag. On the morning of April 14th, a young Irish woman named Nora Healy was sitting in the third-class common room writing a postcard. She was 22 years old. She had left County Cork 2 weeks earlier. She had never been on a ship before. She had never left Ireland before. The postcard was to her mother. She wrote, "Everything is wonderful. The ship is so big I got lost twice yesterday. The food is very good. I will write again from New York." She never got to write again from New York, but the postcard was found. Someone in her family kept it for over 100 years. Let us talk about the crew, because 885 members of the crew were also on that ship, and they are almost never mentioned. There was Harold Bride. He was 22 years old. He was the junior wireless operator. His job was to send and receive messages, telegrams for wealthy passengers, news updates, position reports. That morning, he and his colleague Jack Phillips were swamped with messages, dozens of personal telegrams from first-class passengers who wanted to tell their families about the voyage. Arrived safely, ship magnificent, arrived New York Wednesday, weather cold but beautiful, bring car to pier, buy stocks, everything going according to plan. They were sending these messages as fast as they could, and in between those messages, other ships in the area were sending something else entirely. Ice warnings. 6 ice warnings came in on April 14th. Some were passed to the bridge, some were not. One was put in Captain Smith's pocket during a dinner party and forgotten. And that is the thing about April 14th, 1912. Everything was completely normal, and underneath the normal, disaster was already in motion. The ice field was out there in the dark, invisible. The Titanic was sailing straight toward it at full speed. Nobody on that ship knew what was coming. Let us talk about the afternoon. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the temperature had dropped sharply. The sea was glassy and calm, which sounds peaceful, but for experienced sailors, it was a warning. Calm water made icebergs harder to spot. The lookouts in the crow's nest had been told to watch for ice, but they had no binoculars. The binoculars that were supposed to be on the ship had been left behind in Southampton. There had been a last-minute change in the crew, and the officer who had the key to the binoculars locker had been transferred off the ship before it sailed. The lookouts were watching for icebergs with their bare eyes, in the dark, with no binoculars. At 4 o'clock, the temperature was below freezing. In third class, passengers gathered in the common room. Someone brought out a violin. Someone else had an accordion. They danced. An Irish passenger named Eugene Daly played the Willian pipes, the traditional Irish bagpipes. The music filled the lower decks. People laughed and stomped their feet. They were alive. They were on their way to America. They had made it this far. They danced. At 5:30 the sun set. The ocean went dark. Captain Smith attended a dinner party hosted by one of the first-class passengers. He ate, he laughed, he talked about the voyage. At around 9 o'clock, he left the dinner party and went to the bridge. He stood there for a while, looking out at the darkness. The ocean was flat and black and quiet. The stars were out. It was one of the most beautiful nights any of the crew had ever seen. He ordered the lookouts to keep a sharp watch for ice. Then he went to his cabin to sleep. Down in the engine rooms, 29 boilers were burning. The ship was moving at 22 knots, 6,000 horsepower. The firemen who shoveled coal into those boilers worked 4 hours on, 8 hours off. Their hands were cracked and burned. The heat was overwhelming. But they were proud to be on this ship. Working on the Titanic was something to tell your grandchildren about. Let us go back to the upper decks. to the last hours of the normal world. The first-class dining saloon had closed, but the first-class lounge and smoking rooms were full. Men played cards. Women sat by the fire and talked. Stewards moved quietly through the rooms with drinks. A woman named Helen Churchill Candy was sitting in the lounge that evening. She was a writer, a traveler, an adventurer. She had a broken ankle from a fall earlier on the voyage and was using a cane. She was talking with a group of men she had met on the ship. They were laughing about something. The ship was warm and bright and safe. She said later that she had never felt more content in her life than she did that evening. She survived. In second class, a minister named Ernest Carter was leading a hymn sing in the dining saloon. Passengers gathered around the piano. They sang Eternal Father, Strong to Save, the traditional hymn for those who travel by sea. Oh, hear us when we cry to thee, for those in peril on the sea. They did not know they were in peril. They sang because they were happy. Somewhere below decks, a man named Jack Dawson was listed on the passenger manifest. Not the Jack Dawson from the movie. A real one, a different one. He was a trimmer, coal worker, on the ship. He was from Southampton. He was 23 years old. He does not appear in any photos. Nobody wrote about him. Nobody saved his letters. He was just a man on a ship, doing his job on a Tuesday night in April. He died, and almost nobody ever knew his name existed until researchers found it in the crew records decades later. At 9:45 in the evening, another ice warning came in from a nearby ship. The Masaba sent a message reporting a large ice field directly ahead. The wireless operator Jack Phillips received it. He did not deliver it to the bridge. He was too busy sending passenger telegrams. At 10 o'clock, Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee climbed up to the crow's nest to begin their watch. Fleet was 24 years old. He had been a sailor since he was 12. He had spotted icebergs before. That night, he later said, the sea was like a mirror. Not a ripple, not a wave. Just black, flat water in every direction. He was looking. He was paying attention. But without binoculars, in the dark, on a moonless night, an iceberg was almost impossible to see until you were right on top of it. In the Marconi room, the wireless operators were still working. Harold Bride finished his shift and went to bed at midnight, leaving Jack Phillips alone at the machine. At 11 p.m., a nearby ship called the Californian sent one more ice warning. Phillips had been on duty for hours. He was exhausted. He was annoyed at the interruption. He sent back, "Keep out. Shut up. I am busy." The Californian went silent. The Californian was approximately 10 miles away. At 11:39 p.m., Frederick Fleet saw something in the darkness ahead. He rang the crow's nest bell 3 times, the signal for danger ahead, and grabbed the telephone to the bridge. "Iceberg right ahead." From the bridge, First Officer Murdoch ordered the engines reversed, and the wheel turned hard to starboard. The ship began to turn. It was not fast enough. At 11:40 p.m., the Titanic struck the iceberg. The impact was oddly gentle. Most passengers did not even feel it. Some described it as the ship shuddering slightly, like the ship had run over something in the road. On the decks above, a few passengers who were still awake went outside to see what had happened. Someone saw ice on the deck. Someone made a joke about keeping the ice for their drinks. In the first-class smoking room, men looked up from their card games, shrugged, and went back to their hands. In second class, the hymn sing had already ended. People were in bed. In third class, people had felt the impact more strongly. Some of them got up to see what was happening. Most went back to sleep. Down below, in the mailroom, water was already rising. The mailroom clerks, 5 of them, were frantically trying to move the mail to higher decks. 200,000 pieces of mail. Packages, letters, postcards, letters from people on the ship, letters to people on the ship. One of them was a letter from a woman named Nora Healy, a 22-year-old from County Cork, to her mother. Everything is wonderful. The ship is so big I got lost twice yesterday. The food is very good. I will write again from New York. It went down with the ship. Thomas Andrews was woken up and taken to inspect the damage. He walked through the lower decks with Captain Smith, looking at the flooding, and he understood immediately. The iceberg had scraped along the side of the ship for 10 seconds. That was all. 10 seconds. But in those 10 seconds, it had damaged 5 of the ship's watertight compartments. The Titanic could float with 4 compartments flooded, not 5. Andrews did the math in his head. He told Captain Smith, "The ship will sink, probably in about 2 hours." Captain Smith looked at him. Andrews said, "I'm sorry." The first lifeboat was launched at 12:45 in the morning. It had room for 65 people. It left with 28. People did not believe the ship was sinking. The night was cold. The lifeboats looked small and frightening. The ship was warm and bright, and it barely felt like it was tilting. Why would you get in a lifeboat when you were on an unsinkable ship? In first class, John Jacob Astor helped his pregnant wife, Madeline, into a lifeboat. He asked an officer if he could get in with her, given her condition. The officer said no, women and children only. Astor stepped back. He tucked his gloves into Madeline's hand. He told her he would see her in the morning. He never saw her again. Madeline survived. Astor's body was recovered days later. His watch had stopped at 2:17 a.m. Isidore and Ida Strauss stood on the deck together. Friends begged Ida to get into a lifeboat. She refused. She said, "Where you go, I go." People watched as the 2 old people sat down together on a pair of deck chairs, wrapped in blankets, holding hands. An eyewitness later said it was the most beautiful and heartbreaking thing she had ever seen. Neither of them survived. Their bodies were never found. Eugene Daly, who had played the Willian pipes in 3rd class that afternoon, stood on the stern of the ship as it lifted out of the water. He later described the sound as the worst thing he had ever heard. Not just people screaming, but the ship itself, groaning and tearing and breaking. He jumped into the water. The water temperature was -2 degrees Celsius. He survived. He never fully recovered. He never played the pipes again. At 2:20 in the morning, the Titanic broke in 2 and sank. The ocean was quiet again. There were 710 people in lifeboats. There were approximately 1,500 people in the water. The water was -2 degrees Celsius. A person can survive in that temperature for about 15 minutes. Harold Bride, the junior wireless operator, had been sending distress signals until the very last moment. The lights went out. He was washed off the ship. He grabbed onto an overturned lifeboat and held on. He survived. His colleague, Jack Phillips, who had told the Californian to shut up and who had been too busy sending passenger telegrams to deliver the last ice warning, he did not survive. His body was never found. The Californian, 10 miles away, had turned off its wireless for the night. Its crew saw rockets in the distance. They reported them to the captain. The captain asked whether they were distress rockets. Nobody could decide. The Californian did not move. It was the closest ship. The Carpathia arrived at 4:10 in the morning and began pulling survivors from the lifeboats. By the time it was done, 710 people had been saved. 1,517 had not. Thomas Andrews, the man who built the Titanic, was last seen standing alone in the first-class smoking room. His life jacket was on the table beside him, untouched. He was staring at a painting on the wall, a painting of a ship at sea. A steward asked him, "Aren't you going to try for it, Mr. Andrews?" He didn't answer. He was never seen again. There is something I want you to understand. On April 14th, 1912, Nobody on that ship knew it was the last normal day. Nora Healy didn't know when she wrote her postcard that it would never arrive. Ida Strauss didn't know when she said the ocean was the most peaceful thing she had ever seen, that she would never see it again. Thomas Andrews didn't know when he walked through his ship with his notebook, looking for small improvements, that in 12 hours he would be doing the math that told him it would sink. They were just living, the way we all live, assuming tomorrow. And that is what this channel is about. Not the iceberg, not the sinking, not the statistics. So this channel is about that menu, printed in gold on thick cream paper, with 11 courses that someone ordered from and never finished. This channel is about the dance in 3rd class, the hymn sing in 2nd class, the card game in the smoking room. This channel is about the postcard. Everything is wonderful. I will write again from New York. Hold your ordinary days carefully, because sometimes you do not know it is the last one, until it is.